why do we do mix templates? It's about time. You want to save some time. So one of the reasons why I make a mix template, especially on a multiple song project, is because I would basically start with getting a mix of the first song, and then I would want to copy those settings to all the rest of the songs. I may do some tweaks later, but at least it's a great starting point. So for instance, on this 12 mic template that we just released, I made these settings for this drum kit. If the whole album was recorded by this drummer on this drum kit, it would make sense for me to save this as a template and then import the audio and to put it back on these same tracks. And yeah, maybe the snare is going to be a little lower on this next one. Maybe the kick's a little louder or something. I don't know. But at least it's a starting point. We might want to EQ something differently. We might want to mute something. There might be a special track, whatever. But it's a great way to get started and to save time. And also, especially this auto line, one of the most important plugins, I think, for recording drums and mixing drums. And having that all set up and ready to go, especially on the same kit, will save an immense amount of time. If everything was recorded at generally the same levels, these gates are going to hit the same way, this compressor is going to hit the same way, these EQs are going to do kind of the same thing just to start. And maybe I'll bypass it. Maybe it sounds better without it. Maybe I want to just tweak a little frequency here and there. That's fine. The EQ is already there, so I didn't need to spend more time pulling it up. So real quick, let me go over what I did on this 12 mic template. The kick is auxed together to this track stack in Logic here. So I did auto align on the individual mics to align them to each other. And these are both aligned to the snare. They're receiving from channel 1. And then it's sending to channel 2, which is this one. I've got a gate on both of them, but this sub freak has, or the low freak has a EQ that's taking off most of the top end. So this is just using the sub, and then the M82 is getting most of the sound of the close kick mic. And then that together is being compressed with a kind of medium attack, fast release. And then I have a little bit of EQ boosting some of the lows, low mids, and boosting some of this like upper mids to give it a little more snap as well. The snare is kind of the same thing. It's track stack or aux together. I just have the auto align on there to get the phase right. I believe everything on the session kind of starts from this snare top mic, and it's all the rest are receiving from channel 1 or from a derivative of channel 1. For instance, like the kick was receiving from 1 and sending to 2, and then the other kick mic was receiving from 2. And then the snare, I have the envelope, which I took down the sustain of the snare a little bit to make it a little punchier. This would be something that I might bypass on a different song, depending on the vibe. And I have a compressor with a medium attack, fast release. And I've got an EQ. Well, I just tweaked this. This was more in here, but it's kind of a similar thing. I'm boosting about 250 and 2K to kind of give it some more body in the lower mids, a little more upper mid kind of presence, and then some of the brightness up here at 8K. And that's it for the snare close mics. Then I've got the hi-hat mics. So I basically duplicated the hi-hat and I flipped the phase on one of the duplicates. And then what this is doing is I'm gating out the snare. So I put the gate on the hi-hat track so it'll only let the snare through, and then I flipped the phase and blended that with the original hi-hat. So the phase flipped snare will cancel the snare out of the main hi-hat track. But I also had to copy the EQ setting to both of the channels. So the EQ setting is cutting the lows, probably some kick bleed in there, and kind of boosting the shelf on the top end. Then I've got the overheads, which is just these two mics, and those are auto aligned together A little bit of EQ, cutting the lows, cutting some upper mids, and shelving down the highs. Probably a little too bright. It was going for a more warm vibe. And compressing it a little bit, medium attacks, fast release. That's kind of what I like to do on drums, is let the transient through and then have the compressor bounce back up really quickly with a fast release. And then the toms, I didn't do any additional treatment. I just kind of left that in. Sometimes I'll gate out the toms and make them very close mic'd sound and very punchy, but other times I find that having that bleed in there can be part of the drum sound, it gives it kind of an interesting vibe. And when I'm tracking drums, that's something I'll think about too. I'll try to see how the floor tom mic works with the hi-hat mic and kind of make those like almost a stereo pair, but not really. But it's just something to think about when you're recording. And then the rooms is the same thing. I did auto align and then individual compressors. This one has a faster attack, 10 milliseconds, and a slower release. So this is kind of smushing the transient and then keeping it compressed. So this is going to be more of a pumpy sound, kind of different from the overhead compression. And then I boosted the mids and cut the highs and lows here on the EQ. More compression, kind of a similar thing, a little slower attack, faster release. This is more of my typical compressor setting for drums to give it some of that punch back. And then some more console EQ. And this I just boosted some of the presence, 3.2K. And then that all goes into a drum kit bus. And then there's just some limiting. There's no additional drum processing. Sometimes I'll throw an additional compressor on the entire kit to give it that kind of glue. But since I did so much compression on the overheads and rooms, I didn't feel like this particular sound needed it as much. And I like to do it that way typically for live drums because it gives me more control in the mix. So rather than worrying about how hard I'm hitting the compressor on the different sections of the song, I can just automate those already compressed signals up or down if necessary. So that is the quick overview of the Creating the Sound 12 mic mix template. It's available now as part of our drum recording and mixing for session musicians course. Check it out on creatingthesound.com. We'll see you there.